Alright, how do I look? Nah, it's too much like a CIA agent. Alright, class, settle down. Settle down, get your seats. Today's lesson. Alright, guys, it's all about the time that the Oregon Highway Department blew up a whale. Alright, let's get prepared. Let's get ready. Alright, guys, listen up. So, on November 9th of 1970, the residents of Florence, Oregon were surprised to find that an 8-ton sperm whale had washed up on the beach. It was already dead, but there hadn't been any whales washed up in the county for many years, so this was a real novelty. It was a real intriguing event. But soon, that novelty wore off and was instead replaced with the reality of a decomposing whale carcass. And so local officials started to worry that the carcass could become a hazard. You know, it might burst apart, or some stupid kid might start climbing over it and it could break and they could fall inside and drown in whale guts. Not a pleasant experience. Also not a pleasant experience was the terrible smell, which definitely added a motivator to remove it quickly. So, the next day, the Oregon State Highway Department was contacted to fix this. Now, you might think to yourself, why are they contacting the Highway Department? It's a whale on the beach. Seems as far from a highway as you could be. But that was part of the legal landscape of Oregon. In order to maintain their public ownership and ability to be used by the public and not privately owned, it meant that they were sort of legally considered highways, which meant that the Oregon State Highway Division was the person in charge of dealing with this washed up whale. The real problem was that because it had been so many years since the last whale washed up, nobody remembered what they were supposed to do to remove it. So it took highway officials all day to decide the plan for removing the whale. The highway officials considered a couple different solutions and decided on which ones would be the most effective. The first idea was to just bury the whale in the sand, but they were concerned that it could resurface after a month or two, or it could come back up to just below the surface, where under someone's weight it might collapse and trap them inside. The next ideas were to cut it, which nobody wanted to do, or to burn it, but that was too impractical. To make matters worse, at this point, the carcass was so decayed from 3 days rotting in the open sun that any attempt to drag it away would have just broken it apart and caused an even bigger problem. And so, a solution had to be made quick before it decayed even more and the smell became even worse of a problem. So, the Highway Department consulted with the U.S. Navy, and they made a decision. They were going to deal with the whale the same method that they would use for most obstacles that they would meet making a highway, which is to say that they would treat it like a boulder. Thus, the whale would be blown up with a half-ton of dynamite. The logic behind this would be that the dynamite would disintegrate a large portion of the whale, and the rest would be small chunks that would be scattered on the beach, where scavengers like crabs and seagulls could eat it, and it would solve it up, right? How could this go wrong?
Is there any chance it might be more than a one-day job?
So obviously, this plan gained a lot of local attention, and because of this, local residents and local news reporters started forming a crowd nearby on the beach so that they could watch the whale get blown up. I mean, one woman even suggested that the workers should wait until Monday so that the people who come to the beach for the weekend could see it. But as the workers set up the explosives, a local deputy moved the spectators to the dunes a quarter mile south of the whale, to what they believed was a safe distance. Keyword believed. And after taking almost 2 hours to place all the explosives, finally, at 3:45 on November 12th, 1970, the whale was detonated.
You get a while? Yeah. That was good.
All right, Fred, you can take your hands out of your ears. Here comes pieces of mine.
Unfortunately, the removal didn't go to plan in a number of ways. First of all, the amount of explosives was not enough to disintegrate the whale, or even to just break it into exclusively small pieces. Instead, a significant portion of the whale's tail was left, and the flocks of seagulls that had amassed from the smell had scattered after the bang. The fact that some of the whale was left over and the seagulls were gone wasn't the most pressing concern of the crowds nearby, though, because the explosion had blasted large chunks of whale 100 feet in the air, and now they had stopped going up and had begun falling back down on the people nearby. So naturally, the formerly spectators screamed and ran for cover to avoid getting hit by any of these chunks of blubber and whale bits. And luckily, no one got hit, but after the large chunks came smaller bits that pretty much got over everyone present and made the awful smell linger for days. But not everything escaped so easily, though. A table-sized piece of blubber fell on the car of a visiting businessman, completely crushing the roof. And once the whale pieces had stopped raining from the sky, the highway workers ended up having to bury what was left, even though they had dismissed that as an ineffective strategy. Now, this strange and peculiar event garnered some fame for the small town of Florence after the news footage appeared in a 1990 Miami Herald column. And tourism contributes a decent amount to the town's economy. And so the residents have made several related locations in the town. For example, parts of the whale skeleton were donated and are now displayed at a local museum, and a local park was named the Exploding Whale Memorial Park. There's also an Exploding Whale beach camp that you could stay at, and for the 50th anniversary in 2020, there was also a couple different celebrations about the whale. There's also a website that's all about the whale, and it has a bunch more stuff that goes into more depth on this whole event that you should check out. It includes some real gems, like a song written about how stupid this whole thing is, and an interactive map of whale explosions. I highly encourage you to check the website out. It's really fascinating. Alright, that's it for today's lesson. Wow, focus. Well, I'll see you in the next one. Stay tuned.
Is there any chance it might be more than a one-day job?